How many drawers in your parents' house were completely full of things nobody ever used twice? If you grew up in the 1970s, you already know the answer. All of them. Every kitchen had a cabinet stuffed with gadgets that were going to change everything. A tiny rake for the living room carpet. A machine that sliced a tomato into perfect wedges in one single motion. A timer you plugged into the wall so burglars would think you were home when you were not. Because here are 30 household gadgets from the 1970s that I bet you have completely forgotten. Number 30. The plug-in lamp timer. A small box you plugged into the wall outlet, then plugged a lamp into the box. You twisted a ring of plastic tabs around a dial to set the hours you wanted the light on and off. The idea was that when your family went on vacation, a lamp in the living room would click on at 7 in the evening and click off at 11, so anyone driving past would think somebody was home watching television. The motor inside the timer made a faint ticking sound all day long, like a very patient clock counting down to nothing. Every family had at least one of these plugged in behind the couch, and most of them stayed there year-round whether the family was traveling or not. Number 29. The Shag carpet rake. If your living room had deep shag carpet, and in the 1970s it probably did, you owned one of these. It looked like a regular garden rake, except it was made of plastic and lived indoors. Your mother dragged it across the carpet after company left to fluff the fibers back up and pull the crumbs out of the pile. The carpet was 3 inches deep. A vacuum could not reach the bottom. So the rake did. Every Saturday morning, someone in the house was raking the living room floor like it was a yard. Nobody questioned it. Number 28. The electric can opener. Before this thing showed up, opening a can meant clamping a manual opener onto the rim and turning a tiny butterfly handle until your wrist gave out. Then somebody bolted a motor to the idea, and by 1972, every kitchen counter in America had one. You pressed the lever, the magnet grabbed the lid, and the blade went around with a hum that made the dog leave the room. The whole operation took about 4 seconds. The problem was that nobody ever cleaned the blade. Years of tomato sauce, tuna water, and bean juice built up on that cutting wheel, and it kept right on spinning through every can you opened. The magnet held the lid after it was cut, which was supposed to be a convenience, but half the time the lid slipped off and fell back into the soup. You fished it out with a fork and never thought twice about it. When the motor finally burned out, most families bought the exact same one again because the old mounting holes were already in the counter. Number 27. The egg slicer. A small hinged gadget with a row of thin wires stretched across the top. You placed a hard-boiled egg on the base, pressed the lid down, and the wires sliced through the egg in one clean motion. Every slice was the same thickness. It did exactly one thing, and it did it well. The problem was that most people used it twice a year, once at Easter and once for potato salad in July. It spent the rest of its life rattling around in the utensil drawer next to the corn holders and the melon baller. Number 26. The antenna rotator. If your house had a big television antenna on the roof, there was a good chance you also had a small brown control box sitting on top of the TV set. You turned the dial, heard a grinding sound from somewhere above the ceiling, and the antenna on the roof slowly rotated until it pointed toward a different broadcast tower. Channel 4 came in from the south. Channel 9 came in from the west. Every channel had its own sweet spot on that dial. Your father was the only one allowed to touch it, and he could tell by the static on the screen exactly when the antenna was lined up. The motor in the roof unit wore out after a few years, and replacing it meant climbing a ladder in January. Number 25. The telephone answering machine. Before voicemail existed, this was how you found out someone called while you were gone. A beige box about the size of a shoebox, connected to the phone line, with 2 small cassette tapes inside. One tape held your outgoing greeting, the other recorded incoming messages. You pressed a button when you got home and listened to the tape rewind and play back. Half the messages were someone hanging up because they did not trust the machine. The outgoing greeting was always awkward. Your father recorded it in his most formal voice, and the whole family stood in the kitchen listening to him talk to nobody. By the end of the decade, almost every household had one, and almost nobody was comfortable leaving a message on one. Number 24. Rabbit ears. Before cable, before satellite, before streaming, there was a pair of metal rods sticking out of the top of the television set. You moved them left. You moved them right. You wrapped aluminum foil around the tips because somebody told you it helped. You stood in a very specific spot in the room because for some reason your body being there made Channel 7 come in clearer. Everyone in the family had a theory about the best position for those rods. None of the theories agreed. Dad wanted them pointing straight up. Mom wanted them spread apart. The kids wanted to touch them, which made everything worse. And the moment you finally got a clear picture and sat back down on the couch, the image went fuzzy again. The rabbit ears were a negotiation between you and the airwaves, and the airwaves usually won. Number 23. The Macrame plant hanger. Every living room, kitchen window, and covered porch in the 1970s had at least one of these hanging from a ceiling hook. A knotted rope cradle holding a clay pot with a spider plant or a Boston fern spilling out of it. Your mother made hers from a kit she bought at the craft store, or she learned the knots from a neighbor who had already made 6 of them. The jute cord came in natural brown or dyed in colors that matched the curtains. The knots had names nobody remembered a week after finishing the project. The plants dripped water onto the carpet every time you watered them because the saucer was never deep enough. Some of them hung so low you walked into them on the way to the kitchen. By 1982, ceiling hooks were coming out of drywall all over the country, and most of those ferns were already dead. Number 22. TV trays. Folding metal trays on collapsible legs, stored in a slim rack by the wall. When dinner happened in front of the television, which by the 1970s was most nights, out came the trays. They wobbled. The legs pinched your fingers when you folded them. The surface was printed with some kind of floral pattern or a painting of a duck. Your drink slid to the edge every time you cut your meat, and yet they were in every living room in America for a solid 15 years. They were not good, but they were there. Number 21. The fondue set. For about 3 years in the early 1970s, no dinner party in America was complete without a pot of melted cheese sitting on a small open flame in the middle of the table. The set came with long, thin forks, each one color-coded so you knew whose bread cube was whose, and a small burner that ran on sterno or denatured alcohol. You dipped, you swirled, you dripped hot cheese on the tablecloth, and you called it sophisticated. The chocolate version came next, and then the meat version, where you were essentially deep-frying raw beef at the dinner table with no guard and no lid. Children reached across, sleeves caught on handles, and the whole thing wobbled on a base that was never as stable as the box made it look. By 1978, most of them were in the back of the cabinet behind the slow cooker, and they stayed there for the next 30 years. Number 20. The Transistor radio. A plastic box small enough to fit in your shirt pocket with a tiny dial on the side and a single earphone that looked like a hearing aid. You carried it outside, held it up, and twisted the dial through a wall of static until a station came through. Your father listened to the ball game on it while he mowed the lawn. Your brother took it to the beach. The speaker was so small that everything sounded like it was being broadcast from the bottom of a tin can, but nobody cared because the point was that the music followed you. Before the Walkman, before boomboxes, this was the only way to hear your station without being in the same room as the console. Number 19. The Kodak Carousel Slide Projector. Now, this was not a gadget that lived in a drawer. This was the center of the living room on any night your father decided the family was going to look at vacation photos. He set up the screen, which was a pull-down white sheet on a tripod that never stood straight. He loaded the circular tray with 80 slides, turned off every light in the house, and pressed the button. Each slide dropped into place with a heavy mechanical clunk. The whole room smelled like warm dust and hot glass. You saw the Grand Canyon, slightly crooked. You saw your mother squinting into the sun at a rest stop in Arizona. You saw 14 shots of the same motel pool from slightly different angles. Nobody was allowed to leave until the tray was empty. Your father narrated every single frame. That is the lake. That is the cabin. That is the lake again from the other side. The carousel was not fast. The fan hummed loud enough to drown out half the narration, which was sometimes a mercy. But that clunk, that rotation, the way the next image just appeared out of the dark like a memory surfacing on its own, there was something about it. It was the closest thing most families had to a movie theater in their own house, even if the movie was just your Uncle Larry standing next to a fish he caught in Michigan. Kodak made millions of them. They were heavy, reliable, and built to last. By the time home video cameras arrived in the early 1980s, the carousel went into the attic next to the slides themselves, and most of them are still up there today, loaded with pictures that nobody has looked at in decades. Number 18. The trash compactor. This was the appliance that was supposed to change everything about garbage. A heavy metal ram came down and crushed an entire week of trash into a dense, compact brick the size of a shoebox. It sounded like the future. It looked like a dishwasher. And it cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. The problem was the smell. You were keeping trash in a warm, sealed box in the kitchen for days while you waited for the bag to fill up enough to justify running the machine. Broken glass went in with paper towels and banana peels, and the ram pressed it all together into something that weighed so much you could barely lift the bag out. The replacement bags were a specific size that no other trash can use, and the store only carried one brand. By the early 1980s, most of them had been disconnected, and the cabinet space converted into extra storage. The water pick. A small electric box connected to a wand by a thin hose. You filled the reservoir with warm water, pointed the wand at your gums, and a pressurized stream blasted food particles out from between your teeth and onto the bathroom mirror. It was loud. It was messy. Water went everywhere. Your dentist recommended it. Your mother used it every night and then wiped down the mirror with a washcloth. The water pick is still around today, but the original 1970s version had all the elegance of a pressure washer designed for the human mouth. Number 15. The electric broom. Not a vacuum, not a broom, something in between. A lightweight stick with a small motorized head at the bottom that picked up crumbs and dust from the kitchen floor. It did not have much suction. It was not meant for deep cleaning. Your mother grabbed it after dinner to sweep up whatever fell under the table, because dragging the full-size vacuum out of the hall closet for a handful of rice was not worth the effort. It hung on a hook behind the pantry door and weighed almost nothing. The motor whined like a small dentist drill, and it pushed dirt around as much as it picked it up. But for a quick pass across the linoleum after supper, it did the job. Number 14. The Stovetop pressure cooker. This was the one gadget in the kitchen that genuinely scared people. A heavy aluminum pot with a locking lid and a small weighted valve on top that rocked back and forth when the pressure built up inside. It hissed. It rattled. It shot steam at the ceiling like a small industrial accident waiting to happen. Your mother used it to cook a pot roast in a fraction of the time, or to can vegetables from the garden in August when the tomatoes all came in at once. Everyone in the house stayed out of the kitchen when the pressure cooker was running because everyone had heard at least one story about a lid blowing off and putting a dent in the ceiling. Whether those stories were true or not, the fear was real, and it kept children and pets on the other side of the door. Presto made the most common model. It weighed about as much as a bowling ball and sounded like it was about to lift off the stove. You had to lock the lid into place with a firm twist, and if the rubber gasket around the rim was worn or cracked, the seal would not hold, and steam would leak from the sides in thin white jets. The valve on top was the key to the whole operation. When it started rocking steadily, the pressure was right. When it started screaming, something had gone wrong, and you turned off the burner immediately. Despite all of that, the pressure cooker worked. It made tough, cheap cuts of meat fall apart tender in 30 minutes. It softened dried beans without soaking them overnight. It turned canning season from a week-long project into a weekend. And every woman who used one knew exactly how to manage it, the same way she knew how to manage everything else in that kitchen. Number 13. The electric knife. Every Thanksgiving, somebody pulled this thing out of a drawer, plugged it in, and stood over the turkey like a surgeon. Two serrated blades vibrated back and forth against each other so fast that the handle shook your whole arm. The idea was a clean, even slice through the breast without tearing the meat apart, and to be fair, it worked better than most people expected. But nobody used it the other 51 weeks of the year. It sat in the back of the utensil drawer with the cord wrapped around the handle, taking up space that 3 wooden spoons could have used. Some families brought it out for a roast, maybe a ham at Easter, but that was it. The blades were impossible to sharpen and awkward to wash because you had to pull them apart from the handle, and they never went back in straight on the first try. General Electric and Hamilton Beach sold millions of them through the 1970s, and most of them are still in a drawer somewhere right now. Number 12. The home intercom system. A panel of beige plastic mounted on the kitchen wall with a row of buttons, one for each room in the house. You pressed the button, leaned into the speaker, and announced dinner like you were paging someone at an airport. The system ran on wires threaded through the walls during construction, and when one channel stopped working, nobody called an electrician. You just yelled down the hallway instead, which is what you were doing before the intercom went in. Some models had an AM/FM radio built into the master station so you could pipe music through every room at once. The sound quality was roughly equivalent to holding a transistor radio inside a coffee can. Builders put them into new tract homes through the mid-1970s as a selling point, and most of them were painted over by the 1990s with every button still in place and none of them connected to anything. Number 11. The Chop-O-Matic. Another gadget from the Popeil family, a clear plastic dome with a set of blades at the bottom. You put an onion or a potato inside, press the lid down, and the blades cut it into chunks. The commercials made it look clean and fast. In practice, the onion slipped sideways, the cuts were uneven, and juice shot out the sides. But the man on television was so convincing that millions of them sold. It lived in the same drawer as the corn holders and the melon baller, part of a permanent collection of gadgets that promised restaurant results and delivered a mess. Number 10. The metal ice cube tray with the pull lever. Before plastic trays and automatic ice makers, this is what every freezer in America had. A heavy aluminum tray divided into individual cube compartments with a long metal handle running down the center. You filled it with water, careful not to spill on the way to the freezer, slid it onto the shelf, and waited. When the cubes were frozen solid, you pulled the lever up and the dividers inside lifted, cracking the cubes free with a sharp metallic snap that echoed through the kitchen. That snap was one of the most specific sounds in any American household. You heard it every time someone made iced tea on a Saturday afternoon, every time your father poured a drink after work, every time your mother filled a tall glass on one of those hot days in July when the air conditioning could not keep up. The tray was always cold enough to stick to your wet fingers if you grabbed it wrong, and if your hands were damp, the aluminum bonded to your skin for a painful half-second before letting go. The cubes themselves came out in strange shapes because the water never froze evenly. Some were solid blocks, some were hollow in the middle, some cracked clean in half the moment you twisted the lever. Half the time you ended up with a pile of ice shards and 3 usable cubes. And there was an unwritten rule in every household. If you emptied the tray, you refilled it. If you forgot, someone would find it sitting dry in the freezer the next time they needed ice, and you would hear about it for the rest of the evening. The metal ice cube tray did not make better ice. It did not make ice faster. But the sound of that lever and the cold bite of that frozen aluminum in your hands is something that anyone who grew up in the 1970s can still feel today. Number 9. The electric blanket. A blanket with thin heating wires sewn inside and a control dial attached to a cord that hung off the side of the bed. You plugged it in, set the dial to medium, and climbed into a bed that was already warm before you got there. In houses where the thermostat went down to 60 at night, the electric blanket was not a luxury. It was survival. The cord always tangled with the sheets. The dial had settings from 1 to 10 and everyone used 7. You were not supposed to fold it because folding could damage the wires inside, but everyone folded it in the morning anyway. Number 8. The garage door opener. Before this, you got out of the car in the rain, bent down, grabbed the handle at the bottom of the door, and hauled the whole thing up over your head while the springs screamed. Then Jeannie and Chamberlain put a motor on the ceiling of the garage and gave you a remote control the size of a brick that clipped to the sun visor. You pressed the button from the driveway, the chain rattled across the ceiling, and the door crawled up at the speed of a man walking backward. The remote worked on a fixed radio frequency, which meant your neighbor's opener sometimes opened your garage too. You came home to find the garage wide open and the cat sitting in the driveway looking confused. The safety features were minimal. If something was in the way, the door hit it and kept going until the motor stalled. They got safer over the years, but in the 1970s, that garage door came down whether you were clear or not. Number 7. The Black & Decker Workmate, a portable folding workbench with a built-in vise that clamped down on whatever you were sawing, drilling, or sanding. Your father set it up in the garage or the driveway on Saturday mornings and used it for every project from fixing a shelf to building a birdhouse. It folded flat and hung on a nail on the wall. It was light enough to carry with one hand. Every hardware store in America stocked them, and every father in the neighborhood owned one. The Workmate was not fancy, but it replaced a full workbench for anyone who did not have the space for one. Number 6. The Electric Warming Tray, a flat metal surface about the size of a cookie sheet that plugged into the wall and kept food warm for hours. Your mother set it up on the dining room table or the kitchen counter before every holiday dinner and covered it with serving dishes full of mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and gravy. The whole point was that everything stayed hot while the family took 45 minutes to actually sit down. The surface got hot enough to burn your forearm if you brushed against it reaching for the rolls. Sultan made the most popular version, finished in brushed chrome with a brown trim that matched absolutely nothing. It came out for Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and every potluck your parents hosted in between. The cord was never long enough to reach the outlet without an extension cord draped across the kitchen floor. Most families kept using the same one for a decade before the thermostat finally gave out. Number 5. The Bathroom Scale, a wide, flat, mechanical platform with a dial behind a small window near your toes. You stepped on, and the needle swung hard to the right, bounced 3 or 4 times, and settled somewhere that nobody fully trusted. You could shift your weight forward and lose 2 pounds, lean back and gain 3. The number changed depending on where on the floor you put the thing, and whether the tile was level, and whether you had shoes on, and whether you wanted to believe it. Every bathroom in America had one sitting on the floor next to the tub or the toilet, the bottom slightly rusted from years of damp tile. The brand was usually Borg or Counselor or Detecto. You adjusted the little dial on the front with your toe before stepping on, nudging it past 0 by just enough to feel better about the result. Nobody in the house agreed on whether it was accurate, and everybody checked it anyway, usually first thing in the morning before breakfast made it worse. Number 4. The Lazy Susan, a rotating tray in the center of the kitchen table or inside a corner cabinet. You put the ketchup, the mustard, the salt, the pepper, and whatever else you needed in the middle, and instead of passing things around, you spun the tray. It squeaked. It wobbled. Bottles fell over when someone spun it too fast. In the cabinet version, it was the only way to reach anything stored in the back corner without crawling inside. The Lazy Susan was the 1970s answer to a problem that could have been solved by just reaching across the table, but it felt like engineering. Number 3. The Vegomatic. You saw the commercial 100 times. A man in a suit placed a whole tomato on the grid, pressed the handle down, and out came perfect slices, perfect wedges, perfect everything. It sliced, it diced, it made julienne fries. At least that is what happened on television. At home, the blades dulled after a week. Tomato seeds got stuck in the grid and had to be picked out one by one. The handle required more force than the commercial ever suggested, and if the tomato was too ripe, you ended up with sauce instead of slices. But Ronco sold millions of them because the man on the screen made it look so easy that you forgot you already owned a perfectly good knife sitting in the drawer 6 inches away. Number 2. The Novelty Telephone. Somewhere around 1975, The phone stopped being a serious appliance and became a piece of furniture you were supposed to laugh at. They made them in the shape of a hamburger, a football, Mickey Mouse, a pair of lips, a Garfield the cat. You picked up the top bun to answer a call or lifted Mickey's entire head off his body and held it to your ear. The sound quality was terrible. Half the time, the person on the other end could not hear you because the microphone was embedded in a plastic pickle or wedged inside a cartoon character's shoe. They sold millions of them through novelty catalogs and Spencer gifts, and every teenager wanted one for the bedroom. The cords tangled worse than regular phones because the handset never sat flat on the base. By the time cordless phones showed up, the hamburger phone went to a garage sale, and the person who bought it put it on a shelf and never plugged it in. Number 1. The rotary wall phone, bolted to the kitchen wall, usually next to the refrigerator, with a cord long enough to stretch into the next room if you needed privacy. You stuck your finger in the dial, pulled it around to the number, and let it spin back with that satisfying mechanical whir. Dialing a number with a lot of nines took forever. Long-distance calls cost real money, so you talked fast. The handset was heavy enough to use as a doorstop. The cord got tangled into a knot so tight that you had to hold the phone in the air and let it spin itself out. And if someone was already on the line, you waited. There was no call waiting, no voicemail, no second line. You just tried again later. The rotary wall phone was not a gadget in the way the rest of this list is. It was the center of the house. Every phone call, every piece of news, every late-night conversation happened on that phone, leaning against the kitchen wall, twisting the cord around your finger. 30 gadgets, and most of them did exactly one job that a simpler tool already handled. If your house had even 5 of these, drop a comment and tell us which one lasted the longest. Which one did your family hold on to years after everyone else had moved on? And if you know somebody who grew up raking the shag carpet and fighting with a metal ice cube tray every summer, send this their way. Hit subscribe to keep these memories coming.